Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It appears that it is February 4th, 2010, and that this is Day 9 Daily number 63. Fantastic, it worked this time. So there's a little bit of a... I don't really want to call it a glitch in Procaster. Procaster software is actually really solid these days. It's that if I close a stream and then reopen it up again, a lot of times it doesn't connect on that second reopening because I'm just severing the connection and starting it back up again. So I want to play my funky beats. Then things can sometimes go awry when I have a little bit of music starting things up, and then I go straight into a little cast. I want to let everyone know today that my illness has caught up with me, so I am in fact a sick, full-time diseased human being. But so my sore throat's an issue, so I won't have enough time to do the commentary afterwards. Like there's going to be no Q&A. But we will do this game, such as my devotion to this show and to StarCraft. And it's kind of a long game, so I'm technically stupid. But no big deal. I'm not going to worry about it. It's not going to stress me out because I'm in a fantastic mood today, regardless. Today we're going to be looking at movie versus best. In case I missed any of that, it's February 4th, 2010, and it's a day number 63. We're doing a Protoss versus Protoss today. Let's go ahead and a little switcheroo right on over to the main map. They're playing on this map, Roadrunner, which I actually think it's a bad map. It just came out in Pro League, and Stork was actually joking about it in his interview, saying that they tested this map, and Judgment Day is the other new one. And a lot of the pro gamers were like, oh yeah, it's horrible, don't use it. So that they didn't use this one, and they used a handful of the other pro maps. And then they put this one in here, and Stork was like, what, did they not even listen to us? Why did they don't even test the maps? And when I look at this map, the thing that immediately bothers me is just thinking about how Protoss is going to deal with the late early game stages, like the early mid game stages, especially with like expanding. So I mean, let's pretend for a moment that I'm Protoss here and I'm up against a Terran, right? We saw Firebat Hero just abuse this ramp so much. Now, if we're on a map like Destination, we have a back door and we can just sneak out the backside. A lot of times it's actually you almost invite someone to be a little bit too aggressive early on because you can swing around the back. There's a lot of room for shuttles to move around appropriately and that sort of thing. But on this map, we saw Firebat here just slowly push across this bridge. And once he just barely got on this side of the bridge, he immediately cut off any sort of movement up to here. And really, you can dart forward with some vultures and plant like 4 mines and come back. And Protoss is going to have a lot of issues with that early on. But, other than that, look at this terrain in the middle for Terran versus Protoss. This is like a Terran player's dream, man. Terran just gets to choose when he moves out and how to position himself properly. Protoss needs to be really proactive about killing off these neutral buildings. I mean, they look neat, but they basically make it so hard in those early mid-game stages for Protoss. Against Zerg, what bothers me, again, let's pretend that we're Protoss here, is the fact that little Zergy pieces they take their natural, and then if they take another main's natural and take that main, I guess in this spot you'd be taking this main as Zerg and kind of expanding back this way. It's super easy to defend. It's an ultra small spot. I mean, it's real obnoxious to try to break that, as it would be on any map, and as if it weren't enough that this is just an already tiny little place for an expansion to be. There's these double bridges here. So, I mean, pretend that it's a big, wide-open spot of land. Then we're talking about something like Fighting Spirit, where Protoss is moving about the middle of the map and can sort of work his way up here and then back down to here. And there's a lot of freedom of movement for Protoss. But these double bridges means that you kind of constrict yourself when moving across, making yourself vulnerable to Mutalisks, making yourself vulnerable to Lurkers from behind. And then if you move up here and you realize, oh, darn, I can't actually attack that. You have to kind of back up, and then you kind of have to refunnel yourself and remake yourself vulnerable across this double bridge. It's just icky. And what's so funny about it is that we're watching a Protoss versus Protoss today. So none of that really is that big of a deal. We're watching movie versus best. I like best Protoss versus Protoss. I like best quite a bit as a player. Because best is the sort of guy who, when you watch him play, he doesn't do a ton of harassment. He's not even really very aggressive with his units. Who's a really aggressive Protoss? Beast is pretty damn aggressive. He really gets up in your face and stuff like that. He does a lot of super aggressive builds. Stork is a player who puts his units in offensive positions. Like, he'll move his Dragoons forward to the front of your base to sort of freak you out a little bit. But Best keeps a lot of his units back when he plays. And if you watch him play, he kind of has this ideology of if you just don't mess with me, I'm going to win. So that's always really fun to sort of see in action. So that's why I like his Protoss vs. Protoss a lot. Movie, I don't really have an opinion on his Protoss vs. Protoss so much. It's has its sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. He tends to opt for a little bit more of the standardish stuff. I'm going to go ahead and begin this because I am continuing to blab on a little excessively. So we're going to go ahead and begin right on into things. Here's Movie spawning at the right. It looks like Movie is the brown pieces. And then we have Best spawning here at the top as the green Protoss pieces. I'm going to briefly clear the chat here and let everyone know that we're watching Best versus Movie on Roadrunner. Go ahead and watching that. So a question early on was to make sure to be consistently discussing pylon placement. I think that's an excellent thing to bring up. Just pylon placement in general is something a lot of lower level players struggle with quite a bit because apparently this is funny if you speak Korean. Oh, yeah, and apparently this is fashionable if you're Korean. Who'd have thought? What a culture gap we are experiencing right now. It was pretty cool that the time matches the microphone. Anyways, going back to the game. Pylon placement is something that a lot of low-level players struggle with because, for instance, I'm going to back up just a few frames here, after this seemingly fantastically hilarious thing. So, bam. Okay, so this is something that an early player will do. Building a pylon. The pylon isn't too close to the nexus. We see that there's some space to build around here. But really that's about all that a low-level player will think. He'll just be like, alright, I'm building a pylon. Oh, there, I did it. But I'm going to continue to mention the idea of placing pylons, both in terms of your buildings and then movement later on in the game. Already, we have enough space here to build tech structures and enough space in the front to build more gateways. That's the sort of shape I see. I also see this shape having gateways out here and then up in the front area here. And I mean, just one little pylon, it kind of is feeling like it's dictating this sort of thing. We can put some forges and robo bays. We have enough space to build pylons around and that sort of thing. And here I am trying to drink water, just knocking stuff off my desk. Man, it's always so weird to me because being sick doesn't actually bother me so much. I mean, I dislike having a sore throat because you know how much I love talking. And I'll come back to this pylon in a moment. But, if I have a headache or feel nauseated, it just doesn't really bother me so much. But it's that I get really tired. That's always just so weird to me, how absolutely incredibly exhausted I get when I'm sleeping. Or, excuse me, exhausted I get when I'm sick. Yeah, see, look at that placement. Kind of setting up, adding on more gateways here, having more space up here. One thing that you always need to be a little bit aware of is dealing with some sort of early game zealot harass. Right now we see that Movie's placing a little bit farther away from his mineral patch, and that's great. I mean, that gateway is going to be able to have the zealot at the ramp right away. This is fairly manor pylonable. It's pretty easy to get the pylons there. If you've noted that manor pylons are really screwing up your play, you can build your first pylon right here. A lot of times we see that, and then the first gateway goes down right there. And notice that still, if we build a pylon here and our first gateway there, we can still have that same shape of our gateways. This sort of nice little L with other tech structures tucked nicely away in there. Oh, look how manor pylon he got. Oh. So we see the usual thing in Protoss vs. Protoss. Notice that this second pylon's going down before the cybernetics core. That's pretty typical because players will in fact be going for a relatively early zealot. And actually, I haven't seen this game. This is actually a nice little opportunity for me to catch up, a little treat for me. And this is something real fancy I'm noticing. A lot of times when players manor pylon, they'll just do it because they can. And they'll think, hey, if I can get this manor pylon off, it can't be bad. That's sort of true. You got to be careful with how you do it. Let's first contrast it with something like Mutilus Cuirass. If you see an SCV that's there, that's just vulnerable, just out in the middle of nowhere, you run up to your Mutilus and you kill it. Whoa, alright, you're awesome. With manor pyloning, though, because it costs 100 minerals, you have to be a little careful with it. In particular, it costs 100 minerals when you're, like, underneath 15 food. That is so early on in the game. So you have to make sure that you have plans, not just for how to deal with that that extra 100 loss, but also to just think a little bit about if your opponent's going to rearrange what he's doing and how that compares to what your rearrangement is, it's going to be a little bit subtle. This is, again, very expensive here, but watch this. I just saw this. Look, there's one guy in the gas geyser. He needs the extra minerals. He's not going to be spending the extra gas. Why stockpile it early on if you're not going to use it like that? Yeah, look. And then this probe finishes sending a second one in the gas. That's cool to see. That's really, really, really cool to see. An early Zealot coming out. Often, if you can get a Manor Pylon out, you just send a Zealot straight away. But, you know, we see Best doing the nice cautious thing, pulling his units back, which is real neat because it makes me sound clairvoyant, because I mentioned that Best really, you know, keeps his things back. But it's less clairvoyance in the fact that I'm a huge nerd and just watch a ton of StarCraft, so... Oh, this is a lot more brutal of a Manor Pylon because it hits these 2 mineral patches, so... The Zealot's having a little bit of issues working his way through. Oh, pobre Best. As you'll note in the top corner, it's 2-1 SK Telecom to CJ Entis. Both these wins are actually from Best. This is his 3rd game in the series. So just something to think about. Sometimes what I like to do is just to state things in terms of comparing it to other things of equal cost. And I don't really draw too many conclusions, but it's always useful, or I should say, it can never be bad to, you know, do that little analysis. For instance, a probe, if it does 3 returns, that's 8 minerals on each return, so that's 24 total minerals. A Manor Pylon costs $100 at the time, and if you cancel it, you get 75 back. So it's a total investment at the end of 25 bucks. So in other words, if you can make your opponent somehow not get 3 probe returns, you succeeded. So if you trap a probe and he's unable to return 3 times, Manor Pylon's profitable. If you make the probes go around, which means they wouldn't have been able to return as much money, your Manor Pylon's been profitable. And these sorts of things are always useful to mention, so maybe I'll be mentioning a little bit of that as well. One thing to note about this pylon placement, same sort of thing as before with that sort of L of gateways. I'm seeing this sort of shape. And this is, I always like quite a bit when things are placed, you know, nice and tucked away, because we can kind of get these nice little walls of text structures around. I mean, the biggest thing to note with good pylon placement is just to be thinking ahead a little bit. If you have bad placement, it will normally... Oh, the double Manor Pylon, that's so awesome. Normally, if you have, you know, issues with your placement, you'll end up with... how would I put this? You'll end up with problems with your other buildings. Your pylons won't really seem like the issue. It will seem like, oh, my gateways were all over the place. But, you know, just planning just a little extra bit, I think, is really important. Because then you don't have to worry about that. You have nice little clusters, which not only make units have a happier time maneuvering about your base, but also makes your macroing easier, and just sort of your thoughts and your focus a little bit easier. Both players going for a very, very fast range upgrade. There's always a big timing window in this matchup if you can beat your opponent to range, because my Dragoons with range will demolish your Dragoons without range. And in particular, this double bridge makes it very, very ripe to do something like 1 gateway, very fast range, and then expand. You don't need that many Dragoons if you have the range early on for a super safe Nexus. If it's a map like Fighting Spirit, where you have a little bit more open of a natural, you're going to have some issues. But if it's Destination, or, you know, this map, Roadrunner, I mean, you're going to be in just Happy Town, South Korea. So doing some scouting out and about. Looks like both players are, in fact, going for something relatively identical. Oh, no, look, Best going instead for the relatively quick Reavers. Again, some people might be asking, why not go straight for the Reavers instead of getting range and then, you know, kind of backing up? It has a lot to do with what the purpose of the Reaver is. So, I mean, let's think about this for just a little bit. Oopsie daisies, just tilted this. So, you get a relatively quick Reaver, or a relatively quick Robo-Bay. Let's assume we're getting the Reaver, because it's still a useful discussion. If you go for a really quick Reaver, you're either going for a really fast Reaver drop in the back, or you're going for a really fast Reaver push at the front. I don't recommend going for really fast Reaver expand, and that the only purpose of the Reaver is to do an expansion, because Reavers are a lot more versatile than that. So, the issue is, I mean, a lot of people are aware of if the Reaver really fast, you can do harassment really well. But against a player who's as good as Movie, and especially any Protoss who's getting range really early, you're going to have issues with your harassment with a super fast Reaver, especially until that shuttle gets speed. So now we're sort of saying, well, if we go for a super fast Reaver, we're probably going to be doing it because we want to have a really fast push. And a lot of times, that early push is not going to be as effective until you have a decent amount of Dragoons that are along with it. So let's just describe what might happen to you if you were out there and you were trying to do this really fast Reaver push. What would happen is you'd first do it a little bit, and it might seem a little, you might have some limited success with it. But you're also noticing that you die a little bit too early. You know, ignoring when the push happens, before you even get the push going, you're worried about dying to just early Zealot Dragoon pushes from 2 gateways. So, you can see now why Best would sort of hit the same result that we're seeing right now, where he's getting the range early on, he's kind of, you know, making sure he can not die to any sort of early push, but then he's also getting a reasonably quick Reaver, because when it does come out, he knows that his timing push is going to be just a little bit stronger. So, you know, we can kind of think a little bit about the variations that may have led to that a little bit. I always like to suggest being pretty extreme in your decision sets. You know, if you want to be aggressive, go all out aggressive. Don't be like half aggressive and kind of make some drones and make some aggressive units. Just like totally go for it. So, in line with that ideology, it might seem like I would really strongly advocate just gunning straight away for that early Reaver. But here, it's important to think about. Let me rephrase that a little bit. It's important not to just blindly be like, oh, well, I heard a guy say to go for really fast Reavers, you know, because you want to make sure that you're very focused in your play. But I just wanted to mention the possible variations that could have gone on with Reavers given this timing and sort of how that thought process came to be, how this timing came to be. We do, in fact, see the observatory coming out, probably a shuttle being made right now. Can't quite tell because I've been pausing it and resuming it so much, so my little timer in my brain is a little bit off. And you can see now that this sort of little advance is really nice just for securing our opponent's double bridge, if we so choose to do that. We can put pressure on, and again, notice that this pylon placement is going to come back here. I wanted to say that this early push is nice for setting up a Reaver push if we're choosing to do that. You know, if we advance to there, we force our opponent to retreat back to here, then we can just sort of park here. Again, coming back to this pylon placement, look at this. It's already starting to use this L shape, and look, we still have a nice nest for some additional structures. And there's Movie, focused as ever. The second place Star League winner. You can win second place, you know. You don't always have to be the guy who didn't quite get there. So Best, you know, this is, you know, he's not doing the Reaver thing. I still thought the discussion of the Reavers was useful. You know, just thinking about all the things that sort of led up to it. Movie's build I would describe as a little bit cuter. He's going for just the one gateway, expanding these, getting these 2 gateways real quickly after that, so that way he has enough Dragoons to deal with anything. And the reason he's not actually getting Reaver is because you have a double bridge for defense that can be nice and useful. So coming back to Best base, continuing the point I was beginning a little bit earlier. Best really likes doing these very, very safe-looking things. We're noticing quite a fast observer, which, you know, anyone knows that a fast observer is a very safe play. It helps you see what he's doing. It helps you avoid losing to DTs. We also saw that very early range, very safe, protects you from the timing push. We saw a pretty fast second gateway, you know, very safe, and now he's expanding. And all this is fine as long as you know where your edge is. You can't just constantly rely on the safe stuff nonstop. And what makes Best such a phenomenal player is how he manages his economy. For instance, I mean, we saw earlier, right at the start of the game, that Best only had 1 guy in gas and then slowly added them in at funky timings after he did this Manor Pylon. Very, very, very clever thing to do. Best continuing on standardly. I like both of these plays quite a bit from both players. I personally prefer Movie's style because I play Zerg, so I don't have an incredible amount of experience with, Reaver Micro. And I'm not going to lie, you really do need an incredible amount of experience with Reaver Micro to, play Dragoon Reaver really well. So I always figure, why do that when I can just spam the D button a couple times? But strategically, Bests is a nice build because it has a built-in timing push. We get this Reaver out real fast for defense, but once we get a shuttle out, we generally have an opportunity to do an attack. Whereas, if you are doing movies builds, sometimes it can be slightly more ambiguous. So a potential disadvantage is that we have slightly weaker, slightly smaller timing windows for our pushes. But what's cool about what Movie's doing is that he relied on just Dragoons early on for defense. And instead of having to dump all this money into, getting Reavers and all that sort of stuff, he can go straight into Templar. And that is something that I also really like, because I can manage Templar quite a bit better than I can manage Reavers. So you'll notice that it looks like Movie is the one who's taking the initiative and killing these off. Why? Because he's rushing for Templar, so he's going to have Speed Zealots earlier. He wants the Speed Zealots to be able to move freely about. He doesn't want to have all these, closed-off passages that best Reavers can exploit a lot. He doesn't want to have, all this difficult movement and, rough spots for Storm. He wants to just clear everything out because he's just going to have more units. There's Best focusing away, setting up the Reaver attack. And, I actually recommend doing stuff like this a lot, or at the very least experimenting with it, which is where you move forward and you intend on doing this drop, because a lot of times he'll focus all his army here, and if he has a huge army, you just pull everything back, and then you come in from back here and drop. If not, you can just rejoin right here. And on this map in particular, that double bridge gives you the opportunity to advance really aggressively. And look at Best pulling back. Look at Best right here. He's already pulled all these guys back. Really, that advancement forward was another way of saying, I'm going to try to make my drop safer. And look at that. Look, the Reaver just shooting the scarab out like a bowling ball as he launches right back up into that shuttle. I actually don't think I've ever seen a Reaver shot that late before. That's actually pretty impressive. Let's watch that again. So again, just to double note this movement, look at the push that moved forward and then back out as the Reaver drop advances in. So, okay, look at this shot, and then, oh, that's so cool, man. It's like the shuttle sneezed out a scarab. Incredible Reaver control by Best. That's one thing to note. He's been super safe, right? He's been very safe, doing everything safe. He's been getting his range early. He's been getting his observers early. He got the second gateway early. He got his expansion a little late, so he'd be safe. And then when he moves forward with this big push, he does it to execute these nice little harassment drops. Aha, now we're starting to see the edge right here. So this pylon placement, which is again an issue that one of the loyal patrons requested that I discuss quite a bit. We're seeing, I actually would probably say I prefer Movie's placement quite a bit more. Look at this just glorious placement. This is fantastic. Stuff hugging this side to make sure that we can't have, anything running behind our minerals from below. We have a little bit more management of space. In this matchup, you generally get around 6 gateways before you take your third, because players are so good at being aggressive and picking you apart with timing windows, and also Reavers are really awesome. So as a result, it makes it pretty important to just have enough stuff to hold the front and to be able to push out and be aggressive. Because in other matchups, you can hold stuff with cute defenses. In Protoss vs. Zerg, you can hold it off with an Archon, some Speed Zealots, and some Storm, and then you're fine, But in this matchup, not quite. The base units of the Dragoons and Zealots are just so powerful. So we're starting to see some more advantages of Movie's play. He's able to have quite a bit of mobility here. Look at this phenomenal placement. See, there's this group here that's obviously going to do a ton of damage to this stuff here. But then notice how the concave is actually centered to be hitting this location. That's very, very clever. He knows the double bridge are going to pretty much defend themselves. They're really easy to defend. But the concave up there is what's going to prevent any sort of counterattack. Now note how Movie went up here and expanded down at the bottom. That is like the most normal thing in the world. It's almost kind of funny how often you see that, because, Movie's moving up north with not the biggest army, and it's like, oh gee, I wonder what he's doing. Oh, there's the expansion. More little Reaver drop action. And Best moving forward and doing harassment at the same time. And those Dragoons, yeah, they killed off an observer, but they also sort of it distracted from it defended this shuttle appropriately, you know. As an added bonus, there's an observer there, so no problem. But, you know, if you can sort of cut in like that, and just make sure that, you know, you're not going to get nuked on the way over, then, you know, absolutely going to be good. A lot of Archons coming out. I would honestly say that if you're a low-level player, experiment with getting more Archons than you are used to. A lot of players know that, you know, an Archon or two, yeah, that can't be bad. But they're not comfortable with the idea of using their first 8 Templar to morph straight into 4 Archons. And if you are doing this style that Movie's doing, where you get the expansion up relatively quickly and then you tech onward to Templar, I think that that is one of the best uses of very, very, very fast Archons and just Archons en masse. So experiment a little bit with that. And then here's Best doing more sort of tactical stuff. Again, notice that Best's army is pretty far back, right? He's not being really aggressive with his army. He's instead just managing his economy. Oh, that's so good. He's instead managing his economy and doing stuff like that, where he kills off every single probe in his opponent's expansion. And Best still holding back pretty far. So this is what's so great about Best's play. Given his army movements, it's going to be near impossible to kill off the harassing shuttle or these harassing Dark Templar before they, you know, get in position. I mean, you could potentially have like a Reaver drop that doesn't go so well, or a Dark Templar drop where you have to retreat relatively early on, but you're not going to like lose those shuttles because of how Best is moving forward with his army and positioning everything relatively safely. So in a sense, Best, at the very least, is going to sort of break even in terms of harassment with you. But if he does break in, like the way he's been doing, it forces you to want to attack him, which a lot of times is not something you want to be doing. Like right now, Movie might start to be feeling a little bit like, I just lost 13 probes, and he's already getting his expansion up, and I haven't really done anything back to him, you know? And then look at this sort of stuff. I mean, this is the sort of stuff where you're starting to be like, oh god, he's really sort of getting in my face. And this is an issue with map balance that I have. Notice how Best expands like this, and by expanding here, he's actually threatening this a lot more. He can actually just sort of and then do this with his shuttle. He can do harassment directly into the back of the main and whip back to defend super easily all at the same time. Whereas this expansion doesn't quite do the same. Excuse me. So right now, as Movie, I have my army in the center because really that's where I want to put it to defend this bottom expansion. I mean, you don't want to be positioning a bunch of units down here because then your main's really vulnerable. Instead, I want to be positioning it here so you can sort of dart back around like this pretty quickly, and also down to here pretty quickly, and also cutting off any units that would come down here at all. But, you know, Movie kind of has his units positioned there in the middle, and it's pretty far back to those Templars, so a lot of times it's just like, oh, I guess I want to go do an attack. And I'm less talking about a mistake that Movie could make, and more the mindset that Best has forced his opponent into. Best has forced his opponent to be uncomfortable and to, you know, want to harass, because that's really one of the few ways that Movie can get back in the game. It's just with like a big ass attack. Just consuming a little water, and he's macroing very well. Both players continuing to upgrade. You also want to forge upgrading when you're on 2 bases in PvP. I think that's very important. I think it's just as important as the tech to Templar. You should definitely get a forge around that period of time. Don't necessarily need to rush for it for cannons or anything. You know, you can have observers in the early stages of the game for that. So let's think a little bit about what's going on in Best's brain right now. Best really has done some really nice harassment, but he's not going to be, trying to burst forth super early. He's not going to try to be really aggressive. He's content to sit on his 3 bases. And, we have some scouting going on here, just sort of poking around and whatnot. But nothing too extreme. And that's just like that boa constrictor style. If you can just get in some consistently good harass, not necessarily consistently, killing off 15 probes kind of harass, but getting in there and killing off a couple probes. Yeah, look, that Dark Templar drop. Okay, so notice, we're actually going to briefly breeze through the game after all this to point this out, but movie had, one of the drops at the back, and then, you kind of saw his units in the middle, unsure of what to do, and then there was that Dark Templar, and there was a little bit more unsureness, and there was the other Reaver drop in the back, and now we're seeing this Dark Templar drop in the back, and that's like the straw that broke the camel's back, that's just like the final little bit of obnoxiousness that makes movie be like, oh, I'm behind, I gotta attack. And how did Best... what did Best get out of this? Well, look at this tiny little area of brown units and this big concave of green units. Very clear advantage positionally to Best. So, to kind of sum up the ideology behind what Best is doing, by the way, look at how many units Best has. Look at that. Look at that phenomenal economy management. Look at that. There's just so many more units. I know if you harass as Best, you're going to have an economic lead. You're going to have slightly more units. But this is a ton of units more from Best. An outrageously large amount of units from Best. And yet more streaming in. Anytime you're in a big attack, replenishing with just Zealots, I really like a lot. Because your Zealots are going to be the one burning up at the front of the battlefield. And just being able to toss them out. Dragoon's targeting stuff pretty nicely. But, the ideology behind what Best is doing is the following. Best has incredibly good economy management and macro. So, already, if no one harasses anybody, Best is almost certainly going to be in the lead when you come out for your big attack. So, one of my favorite examples of this is Flash against Best on Fighting Spirit. That actually happened not so long ago, and there's a Day 9 Daily episode of that everyone should watch. But in that game, Best and Flash didn't really attack each other at all. And then Flash just came out, and Best won. With unbelievable amounts of units and unbelievable amounts of tech and upgrades and arbiters and everything. So he does almost that in every single one of his matchups. He has that really good sense of how to manage everything. So already Movie's under pressure just to not screw up and to play perfectly. But in addition to this, just a handful of little probing, poking, harassment drops that do some damage, it creates so much unease in Movie that Movie's just like, I got to attack. And when I mean unease, I don't mean emotional sort of, ooh, I'm going to make a bad decision now. It's a situation where you've taken damage to your economy and you're behind, and the question is, how do I get ahead? Sometimes it's with a big attack right now because your opponent invested into all this extra harassment. Sometimes it's to expand more and just to be calm and relax. Sometimes it's to do everything you're doing normally because the harassment didn't do as much damage as you're perceiving. These sorts of things. So I just love how solid Best has been playing this. That he just stayed back and hugged up here for so long, and then after his opponent did this huge mistake, now Best is advancing forward to the center of the map. But no sooner. It's the boa constrictor style, where you just slowly put more and more and more and more pressure on your opponent. Sort of force him into situations he doesn't want to be. And then you sort of explode forth into the center of the map at key times. Look at those super fast Archons. Archons are so good in this matchup, they just demolish Zealots. So yeah, and now let us just sort of reiterate what we're seeing Best do now. Best has expanded here to this left side, and he's kind of pulling his guys back. He's killed this Nexus here. How's he going to deal with these other expansions? Well, he's going to just send 2 Zealots down there. No overcommitting. It's almost like Best camped up here, and then once he has his opportunity, he's going to, camp right here. He's still has this sort of held back general theme going on. And if you do this, what will happen is that you will have longer games that have bigger stretches of boring periods, but you'll still end up with a lot of wins in situations that you wouldn't have had you tried to attack early. So best storming himself a little bit, just varying up his style. So at this stage in the game, it's, I think, a very clearly cleanup for best. But what I love is that he's just not attacking. Notice that there were no probes mining at any of those locations. I just want to note that once again. There's the self-storm. Fantastic. Some zealots trying to do some jazz over there. Okay, look, no probes. No probes out of that one, obviously. Then go to the main. No probes being made. No probes being made. No probes being made. And not actually that many probes overall anywhere. Very interesting to think about. What was the economy management like of Best? When was he making probes? When was he cutting them? How was he doing this so he could devote tons and tons and tons of resources to everything that his little heart desired? Pretty phenomenal play. Now, Movie's going to try to hang on here for just a niblet longer, but I love the way that Best is playing this out. Just super passive. I mean, he's moving around. In Approach with Protoss, you generally do see those very large, sweeping army movements, but for the most part, I could just draw a little blob. Here is the place where his units are going to be. Whether they're moving or not moving is irrelevant. Look at that, more cannons being added. Oh my god, I love that. That might be my favorite aspect of this entire style that we've been seeing go on, is that he's adding more cannons when he already has map control, when he already has economic advantage. He just wants to make sure he doesn't lose to this sort of thing. And, I mean, he didn't have his map hacks on, he's just aware of the ways that he can lose this game right now and is avoiding one of them. And I'm going to rewind for this battle, but first of all, note the general effect. Green smashes brown because green had the good concave. I think it's actually important to note that that is the big idea there. But I'll just come back and do a little bit of focus on the actual battle itself. So we're going to see the observers kind of check out. Excuse me, I probably have mono. It's going to take, I'm going to sleep for several centuries, going to hibernate because I'm just a little bear. I'm hairy enough to be one. Ho ho! A lot of times what's very important in these battles is to sort of force your opponent's units to cluster in places he does not want them to. So you do this kind of by having a line here and then pulling back, and you'll have his units tucked together. Yeah, like right here, notice how all these brown units are kind of nicely sort of blobbed up there because these Dragoons were pulled back at the right angle. And you know what? A great way to practice this is to get a friend and play a game on like slower, on like a relatively low speed, and then just sort of run up to each other, play a battle out, but save it before you do, and reload it a bunch of times. And that way you sort of see how stuff's getting super clustered. And you kind of make the fake promise to each other that you're not going to try too hard to micro, that you're going to let stuff do what the AI wants it to do a little bit more. But that's an excellent way to practice that sort of clustering. Notice that in this scenario, Bess is doing harassment, but this harassment only came after these 4 bases were ultra secure. After a big battle was won up here, don't go too harass heavy. Actually, a lot of times players will be at an economic lead, and then they'll start harassing a lot. Now, if you think about that, that doesn't quite make sense, because if I'm at an economic lead, why am I harassing you? Because harassing will only, give me an economic lead. I already have one. I should actually reword that a little bit. So harassment's good, if you can get away with harassing, do it. But a lot of times people will get in an economic lead, but they won't really have good defense. It'll be 4 bases to 3 bases, but the 4 basing player will not have so many cannons, will have just won a big attack, so he'll get kind of small on units. And in this economic advantage, he'll go, I'm going to harass. And he'll devote a bunch of money incorrectly to doing harassment then, and he can't really afford it. So the harassment, whether it goes well or not, a lot of times the harassed player can just whip back and push forward and do a ton of damage, and the harassing player goes, I was at 4 bases, and I was harassing him. How did I lose? This game sucks. So that's why I'm sort of emphasizing the fact that harassment took quite a while to come. Best really spent a lot of time securing this, making sure that this double bridge was secure before any harassment came at all. And that harassment, again, is less something to get a bigger economic lead, and more to take little jabs at the opponent to force him to make mistakes he doesn't want to make. Because again, if you're movie, you lost your main nexus, you know your 3 base versus 4 base. There's 5th base coming, we're going to ignore it. You know your 3 base versus 4 base. And then all of a sudden, you're getting storm dropped and you're losing 3 or 4 workers. A lot of times you'll just spaz out and attack in a position that you really shouldn't, but in a position that you feel like you're obligated to. So, yeah. And then now Best does something he does very well, which is, note how this is the first attack of the entire game that Best has really been attacking in any position that's not hugely favorable to him, whether it be terrain-wise, concave-wise, army size-wise. And then what Best does is, after he's done nothing but these, engagements that can only be good for him, he just forces his way into one of these little alleys because he just has so much money it doesn't even matter in the end. So I do want to note how close this battle is. Oh, I actually thought those were Blues Archons. Okay, it's a little bit less close. But, this battle, I'm going to describe this as close, even though it's pretty clear Best is about to win. Note how it's 4 base versus 5 base now, how brown, how movie that is. Lost his main nexus, lost 13 probes right here, and is still having a reasonable amount of units to defend this attack. That really is an illustration of how important it is to make sure that you have enough stuff to break something, that you're not trying to just hit someone in an unfavorable position. Because even Best, who has every advantage in the game up to this point, still didn't quite have as decisive of a battle on this plateau here, because of the advantage that Movie had with the high ground. And of course, this is just cleanup for now. And that's just going to be about that. So I just briefly want to review a few moments I liked quite a bit. These little move forwards, look, this little move forward by Best. He sort of scoots forth, and then he just scoots right back. He scoots forward in a period of time where there's no way he's going to die, where there's nothing that's really going to threaten him, and then he just pulls it right back to safely expand. And then let's drag along here. Look, big army coming out, but the whole point is to do the shuttle harass at the top. It's this nice little dance. It's kind of like when you're watching a Street Fighter 4 or any any players who are really good 2D fighting game players. You'll see them sort of dance forward and back and do all these extra moves. And it's a sort of like conceal where the sweet spot of their play is. And here, we see that there's this big movement forward with Best, and it's really just to sort of force the Reaver drop to happen the way he wants it to. So I unfortunately am just feeling really ill, so I'm going to go to bed on a slightly shorter episode. But we're going to be doing some Zerg vs. Zerg next week, because sort of comically, despite the fact that I'm a Zerg player, Zerg vs. Zerg is the matchup I have covered least of all matchups in the Day 9 Daily. So we're definitely going to do a little bit of that. And because I feel like it, we're going to do a treat for Day 9 Daily number 65 and check out an incredible 2v2v2v2 BGH game that was played by a friend of mine, the infamous Dane. So hey, thanks so much for listening, everyone. Again, I won't really be taking questions because my throat hurts, but I'm going to unmute the chat, so feel free to discuss the amazingness of this game amongst yourselves, and I'm out for the night. Cheers, everybody.